Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast and the founder at Family Office Association. It is great to be back in my humble abode, I guess you could say, at my office here in Connecticut. It's been a pretty crazy 10, 11 days in Miami at Art Basel. We'll cover that and more in other programs that we have upcoming. And I look forward to sharing with you all that I learned and who I met and how I think it could be valuable to my audience. But today we're really fortunate. It's been about a year. We have the return of Robert Breedlove. Usually it's a good sign when my guest, their name makes it into my title. It means they have a lot of followers. So it's Robert Breedlove on Bitcoin. Robert is the host. If you don't know, and it's one of my favorite shows to watch, What is Money Show? Robert, it's great to have you back.
Angelo, glad to be here. I cannot believe it's been a year already, but here we are.
Yes, it's been a year. And I told people this week we have on Rail Powell for, again, he was on about a year ago at Real Vision. And if you haven't watched it, definitely go to Robert's channel, which you should be subscribing to, by the way. His interview with Rail Powell was simply amazing. Really one of the best that I've heard this year. I don't know if there is a such thing as podcast of the year. If there is, hopefully some of my shit's up for it, but I know that some of yours is, and that would definitely be one that would qualify. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I take no credit for that episode. Raul and I had traded some messages about it for some time, and he just made the point that he had never laid out the entirety of his global macro thesis, like working from really the beginning of the 20th century all the way through to today. And he does it masterfully in that episode. I think the whole episode's about 2 hours and 20 minutes, but just extraordinarily dense, a lot of information there. And he also broadcasted it on his channel, and it's been unbelievably popular. I think between his channel and my channel, it's hit probably close to 500,000 downloads. Nice. Maybe more, and that's just in a couple of weeks. And honestly, gives you a lot to think about. He makes a very strong case for the inexorability of demographics changing things. So he unpacks it a lot better than I ever could. But having listened to the episode twice myself in post-production, I got a ton of value out of it both times. So I highly encourage everyone to go check that out.
For sure. And actually on the demographics and politics, we'll probably get into that a little bit later, because I do think that plays into the Bitcoin and the digital asset story broadly. But why don't I start? I heard you state, I buy Bitcoin every day and hold it as 100% of my long-term savings. This has been your strategy, I believe, for the last 5 years, seeing that Bitcoin, as you state, is the only asset immune to wealth redistribution measures. The choice for you has been clear. My question for you, I think I know the answer, but I'm still going to ask it. Since you stated that, has your opinion changed?
It most certainly has not, as you might imagine. It's everyone's after the untouchable asset. Everyone wants to be, and even this phrase we use, independently wealthy, right? This is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And individuals independently wealthy, they made it on their own, whatever, which is kind of a misnomer, because no one makes it on their own, right? That's what the economy is we're trading and interfacing with one another to create value for one another. So no one makes it on their own. But I think that term, independently wealthy, alludes to this latent desire of humans to want to have a position in the asset that is the most valuable, and a component of that value is its resistance to debasement or confiscation or manipulation of others, right? This is very important. It's political resistance or political immunity. And this is something that historically gold served. The gold was the main asset capable of being that historically. And we know this, like we know almost intuitively how valuable gold is, how important it's been throughout human history. We have all these phrases embedded into our language, worth his weight in gold. That restaurant's a gold mine. His word is as good as gold, et cetera, et cetera. We know gold is very deeply embedded in our sociocultural discourse, but it's embedded there because it was this apolitical money, right? It was the money no one could counterfeit. So it seems like almost natural as individuals seeking to expand their influence in the world, really frankly, establish a more prosperous and powerful existence, right? To have more freedom, to be able to go farther, go further, enjoy more things, do more things. You need to have recourse to this asset that everyone wants, but is really hard to get, type of thing. That's what gold was. So a bit of a tangent there, but we look at Bitcoin. I look at Bitcoin as something disruptive to this premier asset that we've had historically. You could sum up a lot of human history in that many of the games we have played have been in pursuit of gold. Even the nation state organizational model we use today, right? It sits on all the gold. It makes all the rules. The idea of that base layer being disrupted by digital technology, I mean, this is the gateway to the Bitcoin rabbit hole. It really starts to shatter your mind about how significant of a transformation this is. And it calls into question almost every aspect of socioeconomic reality, right? What is government? What is value? Why do we follow these rules? Why have we shifted away from legal discovery, right? This is like the English common law tradition or the ancient Roman law, where we would observe interactions of people across time and extract the useful principles of those interactions and codify those as law. So it was a discovery process. Mm-hmm. But yet today we've shifted to a much more heavy-handed legislated legal process where a sheet of paper is signed by someone in authority and then that rule is shoved down people's throat. So there's this transformation that's taken place beneath society. And I think a lot of it has to do with the shift in the money, right? We've shifted away from a free market discovered monetary technology in gold. We shifted to this fiat currency that is essentially, it's a money mandate, basically. It's mandated that you use it to pay your taxes, do other things, et cetera. And I think that has created massive distortions in socioeconomic reality. And so Bitcoin, like, even though it's a new technology, it's kind of like just getting us back to our roots. It's like we're just returning to the foundational principles of Western civilization or free market capitalism or laissez-faire market economies by embracing Bitcoin. And so that's a mouthful to answer your question, but it's like, why would I want to buy anything else? Why would I want to buy anything else other than equity in the future of Western civilization? That's essentially what Bitcoin is. And that's why I buy it every single day. I strive to never sell it. On a significant dip, I'm opportunistic and I buy more. Mm-hmm. And I intend to keep doing that forever. And it's a very simple strategy. It's a piece of cake, frankly, and it gives me peace of mind. So that's what.
Yeah, those are all things that we're going to get into a little bit of how I've adapted what I do, and I'm very active in digital. But there's something in the quote that I said that I just want to verify: 100% of long-term savings. Now, yes, I know you're not as active yet, and who knows, in other crypto and digital assets. So strictly, it's just Bitcoin from that perspective. But have you foregone, God forbid, gold, bonds, stocks, and strictly it's only Bitcoin? Don't you see great potential in stocks and companies? How come that's not a part of your portfolio?
Yeah, so historically, I've owned all these things. I've owned gold, I've owned equities, I've owned alternative crypto assets, I've traded a lot, and I ran a hedge fund in the space for a number of years. But the realization to me, and the crux of all this ultimately, is counterparty risk. Again, like we're just describing, every asset you just named is vulnerable to the opinion of someone. You could maybe asterisk gold there and say, well, if you have physical gold, not so much. I've got gold buried in my backyard, so that would protect me from the opinions of others. Sort of. The problem with that is that central banks own 20% of the global gold supply. And if you look into schemes like the London Gold Pool and these other machinations, they're heavily manipulating the price of gold in the paper market. So I think gold's sort of a gray area there. Bitcoin is the only one that cannot actually be touched. So I've walked through what I consider to be kind of this jungle of other investment categories. And the more I have learned about Bitcoin, the more I have sold those assets to buy more Bitcoin ultimately. So the position and what I'm working towards here is there's an old, I think this is in the Jewish Kabbalah, where it says a man should hold a third of his wealth in land, a third of his wealth in his business, and a third of his wealth in cash. Now, cash in this sense is not the government paper we have in our pockets. Cash in the original sense comes from the French word caisse, which means cash box, basically, or money box. This indicated an instrument of final settlement. So this was a monetary metal. That's what cash was. It was some bearer asset that was 100% equity and 0% liability. So when banks would settle with one another in physical gold, that was cash settlement, basically. So the point here is, I think what I give from that is you need 1/3 optionality. And that's what cash is, right? It's like it's money, it's a claim, not a claim, it's a call option on pretty much anything the marketplace can bear. You'd have 1/3 of your wealth in the land, right? This would be residential, perhaps commercial real estate, depending on the nature of your affairs and your business. And then you'd have 1/3 of your net worth in your actual business. What is the thing that you're doing every day? So for me right now, what this looks like is Bitcoin is cash for me. Bitcoin is the ultimate non-counterparty instrument of final settlement. It's, as I've described to you before, I think the definition you liked was a non-counterparty insurance policy on central banking. So the more dollars they print, the more valuable this policy becomes, but it's non-counterparty, and I don't have to depend on an insurer to pay out my policy. I just hold the asset that they cannot counterfeit or print, and it appreciates the more they counterfeit and print money. So really powerful there. So Bitcoin is cash for me. My business is this digital media consulting business. It's very heavily involved in the discourse of Bitcoin. So I hold some of my business's treasury in Bitcoin as well. And then the land component is something I'm working towards. I think I'm worried about real estate in the short run because the way I see it, governments worldwide are quite insolvent. And the dicier things become, the more likely they are to violate the most unconcealable property right, which is real estate itself. So I think real estate taxes are going to go up significantly in the coming decades. I think eminent domain, which is something we do here in the United States, is going to be practiced more exotically, let's say, where governments will be performing outright seizures of real property. And amid all this turbulence, all these wealth redistribution efforts, right? All this churn, all this muddying of the waters, what is being created, but even more demand for an untouchable asset. So that's why I'm so heavily weighted into Bitcoin at this particular juncture in my view of the macro historical landscape.
You bring up a lot to chew on there. I'm going to get a little sensitive. I mean, I've written to family offices in my master classes about sovereign risk. It was one of the most comprehensive reports and master classes, about 200 pages that I've ever done. And there is a tendency among Americans to think that this can happen here. The things that you noted, government confiscation, happens all the time through various taxation that we have. No matter how rich you are, you have very little control of it. You may think you have political clout. In the short term, you might, but in the long run, it's very debatable. There's a variety of ways that governments could forfeiture and quote unquote take your capital.
Mhm.
But what you're mentioning about what could happen here, and probably to some extent will, suppose we have an AOC as a president in 8 or 12 years, and we're getting massive taxes on realized capital gains, suppose on real estate. I'm assuming you thought about keeping your optionality open, looking at other countries. The challenge with that is a lot of the countries that some of us are looking at, Portugal, St. Lucia, even to some degree, shockingly, Italy, Bulgaria, if you go back a couple of decades, a lot of those were in a horrific mess. They're small countries that aren't politically or militarily powerful. Other countries, China and others, may influence them. Is this something you're considering and weighing the risk?
Yeah, so I do think it's very dangerous and hubristic to ever consider that you are insulated from the affairs of the world, or that, you know, this American exceptionalism of it could never happen here, right? We're different. We're somehow, this country's better than this government's different and better than other governments. I mean, I think this is a very base level ignorance on the nature of the business of the state, right? These are just this is a key point, I think. It is my view that every human organization is a business. And I think if you've been on this earth for any amount of time and dealt with people and businesses, you'll kind of see that. People are in pursuit of their individual self-interest. They'll come together and coordinate and collaborate if they can do something that produces greater results than they can do individually, which fortunately is a lot of things, right? We are more wealthy and productive acting in concert than we are in isolation, hence all the social cohesion. But the state specifically is a business model premised on plunder, frankly. And we've talked about this humans have been talking about this for hundreds of years, if not thousands, that we needed this institution to preserve property rights, right? We needed to give away all of our ability to project force to a monopoly so that we could all have peace and have fruitful trade and cooperation amongst ourselves. So this institution, this monopoly on violence, that's intended to preserve and sanctify private property rights, that's its purpose. The problem has always been, you've given all of this power to one business. They now wield the power to violate those very property rights they are entrusted to protect. And this has been the cycle we're caught in, right? It's like, okay, establish peace, conquer lands, give us good, reliable rule of law, private property rights, honest money. The citizenry will build a lot of wealth. Well, when the state runs out of territory to conquer, it sort of like turns in on itself and it starts to violate the wealth of those very productive market actors that form its constituency. So for that constituency, historically, and I challenge anyone on this, like, show me somewhere where trusting your government over a long time horizon was a winning strategy historically. Anyone, show me once. Show me once. I have yet to see it. I've heard various, most of those counter arguments to that point come down to, well, in World War I or World War II, when we were at war, you needed to trust your country to go bust up this other country. So maybe at wartime, things get a little bit more blurry, but in general, like in peacetime, it doesn't ever work. There always has to be this very healthy skepticism of government action, because ultimately government action is premised on involuntary exchange. And so what I think is happening today is, and Mark Andreessen said this best, software is eating the world. If you don't see that by now, you're living under a rock. And I suggest you wake up and look around. But you should also consider how deep that single phrase, how potent that single phrase actually is. Because software is not just eating, our attention span. We're all on our phones, we're all on our computers all the time. It's not just eating all the traditional business models, right? Legacy media. we could go through the whole gamut of companies that have been disrupted by digital technology. The most valuable companies in the history of humanity are all digital now, right? Just looking at the FANG stocks, for instance. What do you think is going to happen to government and the state in the digital age? Software is eating the entire world. This includes the state. So I think what we're going through now is the tremors related to that. That this ancient, it's the nation state is not ancient. The nation state is modern, but statism itself is a bit more ancient. There's always been this centralized political command and control hierarchy sitting atop most economies. But the economies that have had the smallest command and control hierarchies, like the United States when it was founded, like Hong Kong when it was going through its wealth boom, the smaller that political command and control hierarchy, the more wealth is created. So I think that's the grander theme here in the digital age, is we start to shrink these human hierarchies that are based on political dominance towards ones focused on mutual exchange, contract law, high integrity private property rights, because you can't coerce in digital space. So that whole model that the state has been built on across, analog physical history, it doesn't work in a digital commercial environment. You cannot coerce a smart contract. You can't point a gun at a math problem. So all these things, like these are, it's almost hard to articulate how tremendously impactful these technologies will be on our human behavior and the way we organize ourselves. So,
but like how that may relate, you're watching what's happening regulatory wise here in the US. And I would say it's been moderately pro Bitcoin and maybe in the middle on other crypto. It's hard to say which direction it's heading towards yet. But some of the countries that I mentioned, and maybe let's even throw in New Zealand, that appears to be popular with families, even Canada, you may want to throw in El Salvador. I mean, I don't know if I trust the direction that they're going to head either, looking 3, 5, 10 years out. Like, how do you know? Are we going to live in a world when maybe we're almost, I know it's one of your favorite books, sovereign individual, but don't forget, as long as you're a US citizen, the US government and the IRS is going to follow you everywhere. You have to be willing to give that up, to pay your exit tax. And, we have commitments here in the US, family, that's not always easy to do.
Yeah, it's a great point that, nothing like this historically has ever happened. Right. We sort of have these glimmers of the separation of church and state, or we had the bankruptcy of the USSR. Like, these give us some historical case study that we can analogize to what's happening right now. But a digital disruption of every analog institutional model simultaneously globally, nothing like this has ever happened. So
right,
very uncertain. Right. And a lot of what I'm seeing here is just trying to look forward into the opacity of the future based on these historical analogies, largely driven by, my directional analysis is driven by economics. It's like, where is the money going? Where is the capital going? Where will people naturally coalesce? That's what helps me build, look into the crystal ball, so to speak. But take all of this with a grain of sand. I have no idea, just like anyone else. This is one of the most uncertain times we've ever lived through historically. What is the right answer to that? The right answer to uncertainty is optionality. So these things you're alluding to,
right.
Well, how do I know what's going to happen in the US? What's going to happen in Europe? We don't know. We don't know which countries are going to turn which direction. So I think it is incumbent upon individuals that want to succeed amid the turmoil that they at least arm themselves with the knowledge of what's going on, like at a very fundamental level, what's happening. If you're just buying into some economic aggregate, well, this politician said this is what's going to happen. Like, you're not seeing the forest for the trees. This isn't about any individual politician or policymaker whatsoever. This is a systemic disruption due to a fundamental shift in technological realities. So there's this old saying that where attention goes, energy flows. Just look where human attention goes today. right? We're not all scurrying into the office place and having meetings and hanging out around the water cooler. Like there's been this giant watershed
For sure.
inflection point, March 2020, where we just were thrown into the digital deep end. And we're all living through these communication devices. And the communication devices, right now, they're a bottleneck, right? This little tiny smartphone screen, this little laptop screen, the technology is becoming more and more immersive all the time. So people, human energy and attention is being channeled out of physical analog space, at least in the commercial environment, increasingly into digital space. We can ignore all the other social stuff, people doing VR meetups and all, like, that's cool and interesting. It's probably going to be transformational as well. But if you just look at the business side of it, more and more business is being conducted over digital rails than ever before. Well, on those rails, you cannot, it's, first of all, you're location agnostic. So there's a great degree of power there. You get to negotiate where you're going to be in the world. As far as to determine where you should be, again, optionality, right? Maybe multiple passports, multiple citizenships. There's likely to be more and more options too, as inflation ceases to be a viable revenue option for countries. As more and more people move their cash into Bitcoin, countries will simply not be able to print money to just paper over past bad decisions. They'll have to go out into the market, afford favorable citizenship terms to people to get talent, intelligence, and work ethic into their country, right? To infuse their economy with lifeblood effectively through voluntary exchange. This is fundamentally different than what we've been doing throughout the 20th century. So I hope to at least incite deeper thinking about how profound the digital age is in people's minds. We ain't seen nothing yet, as we might see in Tennessee. This thing is just getting started.
Yes. Okay, that brings up a lot. So the evolving nature of technology, Web3, the rise of eventually artificial intelligence, the loss of jobs. Will we need universal base income? It was actually one of my questions potentially coming up later. There's always going to be more have-nots that have an equal vote versus haves. But that brings up another question. The average US senator is about 65 years old. We're talking about exponential technologies that are evolving so rapidly. I dedicate myself about 8 or 10 hours a day to this. Now, I'm not naturally smart, and I can't keep up with it. What's going on with DAOs, with Web3? And and I know I represent them with Family Office Association, but if I'm a entrenched billionaire, the system works. I don't want it to change. And I may look to be reluctant and try to influence, because change it's an unknown for me. So are we fighting an uphill battle with entrenchment of companies, politicians, and powerful families that may not want some of the changes that appear to be inevitable to happen so quickly?
Well, maybe you could say that we're fighting an uphill battle and that they are entrenched in a higher position on the socioeconomic hierarchy. There are many that benefit from the existing fiat currency complex.
Yes.
But that would fail to account for what I'm describing here, which is this, Noah's Ark level flood type cataclysm of digital reality. Like they may hold a high position in the hierarchy, but this digital flood is worldwide, right? And it's eroding all hierarchies. If your hierarchy is premised on coercion, compulsion, rent seeking, any asymmetric power or intermediation, it is at risk, right? There's a reason Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett hate Bitcoin with all of their last cellular being, because 40% of their fucking portfolio is banks, right? It's an intermediary business function that Bitcoin just dissolves and devours. So you could say we're fighting uphill, but I don't think we have to fight at all. You can just hold Bitcoin, anticipate others acting in their own individual self-interest, be where the puck is going, and then you can benefit disproportionately in the resultant wealth transfer. Again, as human attention and capital flows onto these digital rails that are intrinsically non-coercive. you will see these hierarchies become composed more of competence and less of political dominance. And that's how that's how you get rich, right? This is entrepreneurship 101. Look around the corner. Where are things going? Where are people going? So it's one of those once in a 500-year type transformations. That's why I've tried to describe, look, for a while, we were roaming around the world nomadically, hunting and gathering, right? We didn't settle in any one place. We went everywhere. Whatever we owned is what we could carry, basically. And then we figured out, and there's a number of reasons for this. We think it's because we like to get drunk, actually. We figured out that we could settle down in one place and grow crops. And we could later ferment those crops and drink and have merrymaking and all of this. So we became agricultural, right? There was an incentive to become agricultural. We could produce more food energy per unit of human energy expended through agriculture than we could through hunting and gathering. And this led to the creation of economic savings, economic surplus, government, et cetera. Okay, then we figured out, hey, we can also industrialize. We can harness hydrocarbons to power machines to further reduce the drudgery of toil, right? Instead of me pushing a plow across my field every day, I could use an animal, or I can use this huge piece of farm equipment, such that we went from, when the agricultural age dawned, 100% of the world population were basically working in agriculture. Today, thanks to modern capitalism and industrialization, less than 4% of the world population works in agriculture to feed the world. Okay, now we're going into digitization. Ultimately, the fundamental substrate of the economy is flows of knowledge, right? And so the faster and the higher liquidity of ideas we can achieve, the more wealthy we become. And when we are facilitating the flows of ideas and now capital with Bitcoin, which is very important, that we can move capital on these non-coercive digital rails. That's the breakthrough that is Bitcoin. All of a sudden, the entire manifestation of civilization looks different, right? Ideas and people and capital will flow to where they are treated best. And any jurisdiction that tries to coerce or clamp down or control, it's like trying to push water, right? It's too liquid, it's too fluid. You can't force it. So it just the tighter you squeeze as a politician, the quicker these self-interested market actors slip between your fingers. That's the world we're going into.
I have a couple of things I want to tie in. So when I look at Bitcoin, which I have great homage for what Satoshi, he or she, or multiple of people has built, truly decentralized, the blockchain, utterly amazing. I probably look at it more as a store of value. What leaves me a little bit, and I know others in the community a little frustrated sometimes at Bitcoin maximalist, is they do sometimes come across as the way that you all would consider gold people from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. What you're describing and what Andreessen said, and the evolving nature of Web3 and DAOs, there are platforms out there, Ethereum, Solana, Terra Luna, where you need to buy their token to participate in these communities that are really taking off. And many of them have been better investments over the last year than Bitcoin. Why is there still a tremendous angst between traditional Bitcoin maximalist and more digital asset believers like myself?
Yeah, that angst exists among these self-proclaimed toxic Bitcoin maximalists. And I don't align myself with that culture whatsoever. If you followed any of my work, I actually stand against it entirely. These guys it's a very interesting cultural phenomenon, but let's just say they regard Bitcoin as the only thing that matters, and they attack others that believe anything different. So it's very dogmatic, very almost like a religious zealotry about it. And I just don't support that. I'll never support that. That's why I self-identify as a freedom maximalist, not a Bitcoin maximalist. I don't give a shit what shit coin you hold. You hold whatever you want. We're going to let Darwinian reality play itself out, and we'll see who's the winner at the end of the day. But I'm in this weird position because, like, you can hold whatever you want. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to tell you to have fun staying poor on Twitter. I'm just going to continue to accumulate Bitcoin because I think that's the most pragmatic and intelligent wealth acquisition strategy that can occur here. So in a nutshell, even if every alternative crypto asset succeeded to its fullest possible extent and devoured every total addressable market that it could, I still think the combination of those, which there's over 10,000 of them today, because again, it's very easy to launch one of these. You and I can go launch Angelo coin in 15 minutes right now on Ethereum. Then we just have to politic it and market it and campaign it and get people to believe in some story. We create market cap for it, right? So it's liquid venture capital with little to no due diligence often. If all of those succeeded to all of our utmost wildest imagination, I think the combined market capitalization of all those projects would still be about 1/5 of Bitcoin at maturity. Bitcoin's a $1 trillion asset competing for global store value or global money. It's a $250 trillion asset class. So one asset at 1 trillion competing for 250 trillion versus 10,000 assets competing for maybe 50 trillion. That's being extremely generous. There's a 50 trillion addressable market for every known alternative crypto asset use case. And there are countless and innumerable computer science challenges, economic challenges, regulatory hurdles, political hurdles, all these things these projects have to overcome to achieve this collective $50 trillion market cap. The risk adjusted rate of return is just not there for me. When I just look at Bitcoin, like all it needs to do is what it has been doing perfectly for 13 years. If I just assume that it continues to do that, it continues to outcompete all other forms of money to grow from a 1 trillion asset towards a $250 trillion asset. And I can hold this asset in a multi-signature self-custody arrangement such that I have sovereignty and redundancy, and no one can touch it. No one can inflate it, confiscate it, stop it.
Well,
I mean, this is like, it's almost short-circuiting how intelligent it is. It's so simple. It sounds almost too good to be true, but the more you dig, the more I believe. I mean, the more I've gone towards Bitcoin, the more I've seen others go towards Bitcoin. They move away from all of this other market space, but this all takes time. You know, what you just bring up here is this past 1 year that we've had Solana or whatever other crypto asset outperforming Bitcoin. This happens in every bull market. In every bull market, these low liquidity coins radically outperform Bitcoin for a short period. And then once Bitcoin goes into a drawdown, it's bear market, these coins collapse against Bitcoin. And in the long run, when you start looking at Bitcoin,
and some of them have bounced back.
Well, when you start looking at Bitcoin across 4-year cycles,
right,
the pack goes way down. 99.9% of these crypto assets underperform in Bitcoin terms. Now you can cherry pick your start and end date and fit it to where there's some that outperform. Sure. And if you want to play that game, by all means. Again, I will not judge you. Go and find your shit coin that you think will outperform Bitcoin, trade it, run option strategy on it, whatever you want to do. I get much more peace of mind just accumulating every day, buying dips. My net worth increases all the time. Just make more money than you spend, buy Bitcoin, sit on it forever. It's a very simple investment strategy that works for me. May not work for you. The last thing I would say here is that I like the point that, yes, Bitcoiners do sound a lot like gold bugs. The difference is we are using much better technology. Gold doesn't work, right? Gold doesn't scale. You try to scale gold, you end up with central banking. Bitcoin doesn't need a central bank. Bitcoin doesn't need any bank. It's a peer-to-peer technology. I would encourage others that are watching this, if you feel lost or confused or overwhelmed with all the new information in this space, as you're saying you're studying 8 or 10 hours a day, it's hard to keep up, narrow your focus to Bitcoin. I mean, I've spent 5 years in this space, reading, writing, talking about it full time. And I've really allocated all of my intellectual energy into it. Initially, it was spread amongst a lot of assets. I've become more narrowly focused on Bitcoin and have found more than enough to think about, write about, talk about. And the last thing I'd say is, you brought up the wants. Maybe the billionaires don't want the fiat currency complex to change because they benefit from it or whatnot. But this is, I think, a defining feature of the digital age is that it will be the contours of the digital age will more so be shaped by technological realities than popular political opinions, because there's just going to be no way to impose willpower. When you try to impose yourself on people that have ideas and capital on digital rails, they're just going to go elsewhere, such that the imposing party or the coercive jurisdiction is devitalized. They lose economic energy and they'll be forced to compete with other more friendly jurisdictions. So Bitcoin is reintroducing the principle of free market capitalism and competition to government itself, which is something that was abdicated when we moved away from the gold standard, because the gold standard was that mechanism. Historically, if a government printed too much money or they treated their people like shit, gold left their country. The country became poorer. Then they were incentivized to treat their people better, right? There was this, it was an automatic mechanism regulating economic flows. Hence the reason we bucked it off, right? Through central banking. Governments don't want to be under any disciplinary enforce. So that was a mouthful, but I hope that's helpful.
No, that was very helpful. And the challenge with that as a US citizen, as you know, depending on your net worth, and I get it, is going to be if you do make the decision to leave the US permanently, you will pay an exit tax. The government will make sure of that, or they'll come find you and get it from you somehow. And I don't want to scare people with the resources of the government and things they could do. I probably speak about that enough already. It's probably one of the reasons why I get in trouble on YouTube. So maybe I'll be a little quiet about that one for now. In answering kind of your question to me, and I'm very open to hearing it, yeah, I probably am overly diversified. And I probably spend too much time dedicated looking to squeeze out what could be a greater exponential return. I don't have a lot to go by in terms of my analytics. Of course, I follow Plan B, who was on last week, and Willy Woo and others. I still look at over 10 years, I think I could get 5 or 10x on Bitcoin, and that's wonderful. But I think on other things that I'm active in investing in social tokens, in the metaverse, and some of it's a little bit out there. Some of it will go to shit. There's no doubt about it. But some of it will probably go 50, 100 or more X. And I'm willing to take more risk for that perception of higher reward. Do I underallocate to Bitcoin as I've gotten a little bit really deep into digital? Probably. But is this something that you occasionally go through this exercise yourself and evaluate your situation?
Well, I think most people come into this space interested in Bitcoin. Once you start looking into Bitcoin, you get immediately distracted by all of its alternative crypto out, and it's a jungle out there, man. It's, you know, the imagination is limitless, really, with how this tech can be used in different use cases. But after going through all of that, trading all of this, you know, both personally and professionally, the options markets, everything, I've looked at it very closely. We've looked at these assets from both a fundamental and a value standpoint. And I'll just say, through my own experience, all roads lead back to Bitcoin. And it changes the way you're looking at the asset class too, because initially you come into Bitcoin, you're like, all right, I'm going to throw, when you know nothing about it, you just hear about Bitcoin being up 1,000% in a year or whatever. You think, I'm just going to take a flyer on it, throw 1, 2, 5% of my net worth at Bitcoin. Maybe it'll go up 10x, maybe it goes to 0. I don't know. But when you get caught in the actual study of what it is, right? And you start going into all these esoteric domains we've described, like the origins of money and government and property rights, that changes my perception entirely. I'm no longer a gambler, and I'm not gambling. I don't consider myself gambling on Bitcoin. I consider myself making the long-term, prudent, rational decision of what asset to hold amid a global near hyperinflationary monetary expansion. We're not there yet, but over the next 15 years, yeah, we're going to be there. Many currencies will hyperinflate. Many economies will probably dollarize or probably shift to Chinese yuan or other stronger currencies. But even those are undergoing significant inflationary pressure. I don't know if you saw this video the other day of Biden on Twitter signing a bill to increase the debt ceiling, reciting to the world that this is about America pays its debts. So he's issuing more debt to pay existing debt. And this is the narrative that's being fed to the world. How do you think this ends? How does this not end in debasement of the currency to an unprecedented degree? We're already seeing even the official CPI number, which is completely understated, is at a 40-year high. We're not even 24 months into this post-COVID global monetary expansion. It's only going to get worse. Again, open a history book and show me where inflating the currency ever ended well, or trusting your government proved to be a winning strategy. If anyone can show me either one of these things, then I'll consider reevaluating my position. But until then, it's like, just accumulate Bitcoin.
Well, as a libertarian,
there's this, I'll just add one last thing. For me personally, it has afforded me the greatest liberation I've ever experienced. I used to own a bunch of stuff. I used to own a bunch of equities and real estate and this and that. And you're always like thinking and strategizing, when are you in, when are you out, the maintenance, the tax, the blah, 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 blah. It's just to cut all that out and just be like, I buy it every day. I buy more on dips. I never sell. It's beautiful to me. I really appreciate it. So
give me the 100x case for Bitcoin. So that would take it to about 5 million a coin. If I had to do it, I'd probably look at, there's billions of people that still have no internet connection. Starlink and satellites are going to change that. Bitcoin is going to be a medium for them to use as money and a store of value. Other countries, along with El Salvador, will come on board. I do agree, you could make a case, but then I think it's fair for me to ask, what are the biggest threats to Bitcoin? Is it Satoshi appearing, being kidnapped, being manipulated? Is it government regulation, which kind of could really mess it up? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of avenues through which to evaluate Bitcoin's asymmetric upside. I think you just grabbed this one. It's very low-hanging fruit. Sovereign debt. Again, we're printing 6.8% CPI in the US. What's the 10-year treasury yield? Sub 1%. So we've got a negative real yield of almost 6%. So you're being penalized for loaning the government money? That doesn't make sense. And by the way, 6.8% is a very understated number. If you talk to any entrepreneur in this country, inputs are increasing 20 to 40% year over year. So the real inflation rate, and again, inflation's tricky because there's no such thing as a universal inflation metric. That whole thing is a lie. CPI is a lie. You can never have it. Inflation is as subjective as the market actor doing the valuing or the buying. It's based on what you want to buy.
If I want to buy more Bitcoin and assets going up in value, I'm going to need to be 100, 100%.
Exactly. So I tweeted this out the other day. Again, for me, it's like, if it don't make sats, it don't make sense. Because if I'm not profitable in Bitcoin terms, then I'm losing financial energy. So, I think, I'm sorry, what was the original question was?
It was
what's
kind
the 100x case? Here's the 100x case.
Give me the best case scenario in 10 years. I'm not even saying in 2 or 3 years, in 10 years for 100x. And I want you to admit what could be potentially the risk, whether it's Satoshi, whether the world loses electricity, or probably the most likely one, powerful governments band together. Now, you can't stop math, and it's part of the US Constitution being free speech. I get it. But they can, in the US, they can make the on-ramps and the off-ramps very difficult. And suppose they start to tax it like we do real estate, where I got to pay 3 or 5% every year as a tax. That would suck.
Yeah. So the 100x upside, I would say, again, just looking at sovereign debt, it's 125 trillion globally, pretty much all negative real yield right now. That's it for Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin will just eat that. And you combine that with the credit worthiness of governments decline as their ability to coerce declines, because the credit worthiness of a government is based on the anticipated future cash flows of the taxing authority. When you can't inflate and you can't tax as easily, and you're facing this jurisdictional arbitrage from individual market actors, that if you treat them bad, just like in any other business, you treat the customer like shit, customer goes to your competition. Well, that reality is now being foisted upon governments in the digital age. They've been kind of able to insulate themselves from it historically because they controlled everything, right? They controlled these command posts of money and infrastructure and energy and information. That's all different in the digital age. I'm not saying this is overnight. I'm not saying this is all by next year, right? But this is the trend. This is the direction humanity is going into. So the threats, which I think you've enumerated beautifully here, is, the most known unknown for Bitcoin is the state response. They're going to do everything they can to stop it, control it, disparage it. They're going to blame hyperinflation on Bitcoin. They're going to blame climate crisis. They're probably going to blame COVID on Bitcoin at some point. I mean, they're just, it's just, what is it? What is Nietzsche? Everything the state has is stolen. Everything it says is a lie. So just take all this shit you hear with a grain of thought and question, like, by what means are they propagating these false messages? And the answer is through stolen proceeds via inflation or taxation. So that's a known unknown. I do think that the ultimate outcome, though, is just, this is something Saylor calls a lower energy state, right? Mm-hmm. Follow the economics. Which strategy is more economic? Buy and hold Bitcoin and just sit on it, or allocate tens of thousands of people to try to regulate it, tax it, confiscate it, chase it. It almost inherently burns itself out. The harder they try to coerce or tax or inflate, the more demand for coercion resistance, inflation resistance, taxation resistance governments are creating. So market actors, in pursuit of their own individual self-interest, will naturally migrate towards Bitcoin in that environment. And the more they migrate towards Bitcoin, the more they're defunding the very apparatus that's doing the coercing. So it's this shift, right? It's just, I'm trying to pursue you and coerce you here. So you have every incentive to exit to where I can't hurt you. The more people that exit, it just tips the scales in favor of individualism and liberality in the world. So we restore or go back to the foundational principles of Western civilization in the digital age. And that's my big thesis on this whole thing.
When I asked this of Bitcoin maximalist, and we discussed that a little bit a couple of minutes ago, it kind of 50-50, which surprised me. What are you in favor of the Lightning Network? Or like some, do you consider it's off chain, it's layer 2, it doesn't quite fit what they believe is the model that Satoshi had in mind, as if they knew him or her?
I'm a huge proponent. I'm a huge proponent of free market experimentation. Wow. Well, for Bitcoin is the ultimate security layer, right? Can settle with finality. If I send you Bitcoin on-chain transaction and we get 6 confirmations in an hour, that's it. I've basically thrown you gold. No one can reverse it. No one can change it. No one can censor it. No one can do anything about it. It's immune to opinion. The trade-off with that is that it's slow, right? It took us 6 confirmations in an hour to move that money. If we're going to have day-to-day global commerce at the speed of light or lightning, you need a layer 2. You need to trade off some of those security assurances for higher transactional throughput. And that's exactly what Lightning does. And I'm not just focused on Lightning, by the way. Again, I'm not dogmatic about this. There's Liquid, there's other projects, other higher layer protocol development. I'm for all of that, all the entrepreneurial experimentation in the world that can make certain design trade-offs to make Bitcoin more functional as money. That's how nature grows, by the way. Nature grows in layers. The internet grows in layers. HTTP, TCP/IP. All of these things grow in layers, and each layer makes certain trade-offs and optimizes for certain functions that other layers do differently, and then they complement one another through interaction. So I'm fully supportive of Lightning Network and other higher order protocol development.
So like Taproot from back in November.
Yeah, of course.
And now there has been talk of, would you like to see DeFi being built on the Bitcoin blockchain?
Yes, there are functions that the financial industry provides that we need to be provided more economically on a Bitcoin standard, but I'm a bit skeptical as to how many of those markets will actually exist in a hard money world. We have 350% global debt to GDP today in fiat land. I think that number collapses to sub 10%. I think
Wow.
debt to GDP collapses in a hard money world because the incentives are to save and not borrow. Why would you want to borrow in a money that's appreciating every year? It's stupid. I don't think people will do it. I do want to say it coming up on the hour here, and I gotta get moving.
If I could give you two super quick questions, what do you think of the Zion social network on Lightning? Fan or not?
Yeah, I'm a fan. I know Justin well, actually. And there is this is obvious, I think, for most people. There's this promise for Bitcoin that by being an immutable transactional layer, that it could actually be used to purify discourse on the internet. This is actually the original purpose of proof of work, was as a countermeasure to spam. And no matter what network you're on today, I'm sure you are being subjected to a lot of spam, scam, phishing attacks, all of this. By just attaching a micro payment to every messaging service, you're reintroducing individual internet users' skin in the game. This is a very important concept from Taleb. And it almost, like, just in theory, would annihilate all of this. And if you want a deeper dive on this, Saylor spoke about this on my show for hours. This was his idea of instituting the orange check mark or the blue check mark or the green check mark on Twitter, where you're basically putting up a security bond in Bitcoin. And now that you have skin in the game, you are incentivized to not spam, scam, or be an asshole. Frankly, you're incentivized to have quality discourse with people.
My last question. I'm sorry, Robert.
No, so that's it. Bitcoin is more than just money. It also has the potential to reinvigorate the promise of democratization that the internet initially afforded us. And Zion is a very interesting project in that regard, in that it would be enabling decentralized social media, uncensorable social media built atop Bitcoin, which is, if you've been following anything in the world today, censorship is a real problem. We need freedom of speech on these digital rails. The combination of things like Bitcoin, Lightning, and Zion make that possible.
In 2013, I believe it was, the first NFT was actually created on Bitcoin. I believe the legendary Hal Finney was an advocate. This also has bifurcated the community potentially moving forward. Are you a fan, like I asked you on DeFi, of NFTs being built on Bitcoin blockchain?
I'll just say that I did a dive on this years ago. NFTs are not new. They're just new to people in a bull market. We've been talking about this for, it's been talked about for a long time. I'm skeptical on the value, but there are some people that I respect that are like, no, you haven't looked at this closely enough. It's going to change this, that, and the other, and the art industry. So maybe there's some value there. Nothing significant enough to cause me to deviate from my piece of cake investment strategy.
Maybe I complicate my life too much, but I have gotten pretty deep into NFTs. I want to be respectful of your time. Everyone go and follow Robert on Twitter. He's at Breedlove22. Again, on Twitter, at Breedlove22. I highly recommend it. His YouTube channel is great. Go and subscribe to that as well. I'll do a final wrap up. You have to run, Robert, but thank you so much for your time.
Angelo, thank you so much. Maybe we'll do it again next year.
I hope so. Look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast, the founder at Family Office Association. Really enjoyed my discussion with Robert today. We obviously do not agree about everything, and that is fine. He obviously has very articulate arguments. He's probably known as the philosopher of those that are extreme Bitcoin advocates. Yeah, I had about 50 more questions for him that, because we were limited to only 1 hour, I couldn't get to. But I don't know about you, but I found it insightful. It was a pleasure to have Robert on. Learn about my organization, familyofficeassociation.com, and follow us on social media. I'm very active, showing my digital chops, or what I think are some digital chops lately. Changed my Instagram name to Angelo Robles Meta. And I'm very active as Family Office on YouTube. And again, you'll find us. We're out there. This has been really exciting. Got a very busy week this week. Hope many of you enjoy a lot of our programming through the end of the year, and even bigger and better heading into 2022. On that note, everyone, have a great day. Thank you for listening or viewing.